I got 99 problems, but a witch ain't one. Today we're going to talk about Grace Sherwood, the last person convicted of witchcraft by ducking, today on Walk with History. So this marker is located in Virginia Beach on Independence and Witch Duck Road, which is so interesting that it's Witch Duck Road because that's what they did to Grace Sherwood. So Grace Sherwood was a woman in Virginia County here, and she was accused of witchcraft. She's known as the Witch of Pungo, and that's because this region was Pungo. And she is the last known person to be convicted of witchcraft in Virginia.
She turned me into a newt!
She was a farmer, a healer, a midwife, which is usually the things that will raise suspicion, because when crops die, when animals die, when babies die in childbirth, the reasons given for it are usually some kind of folklore or some kind of witchcraft. And so if you are involved in those things and things happen like they do where those things might die, the blame is usually onus on a woman.
A newt.
And so that's what happened to Grace Sherwood. She was convicted of witchcraft. She was brought up on witchcraft charges many times before she was actually convicted of it.
It got better.
And this marker is in the area of her statue, so we're going to go over to her statue. But this is the area where the colonial courthouse was, where her trial was actually held. And we'll talk more about ducking and what that entails, but this is the marker here in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So this is the statue of Grace Sherwood here in Virginia Beach. She was born in 1660, she dies in 1740. She's married in 1680. She has 3 sons. Her husband dies in 1701. So her trial happens in 1706. So her husband has been dead 5 years when she is tried. She's survived by all 3 of her sons. There's no drawings or depictions of her face that survived, but she is claimed to have been a tall woman who was attractive and had a great sense of humor. And she wore pants when she worked on her farm, and those things created animosity and suspicion around the people in the village. She's depicted with a raccoon because of her love of animals, and she's depicted with rosemary and garlic in her satchel because she was a healer and she used herbs to heal. So that is why the statue looks the way it does. But people have left some pennies, and she's wearing her hair in a bonnet. So this also talks a little bit about the trial. We're going to go at which duck point we're going to go there. It happened on July 10th, 1706, and she's the one who said, "Duck me." So it's actually duck. It's not dunk, it's duck. So when they duck a witch. So what she had been accused of witchcraft 4 times before this. A bull died, they accused her of witchcraft. Some pigs died, they accused her of witchcraft. Some crops died, they accused her of witchcraft. A woman, she helped deliver her baby, the baby died, she was accused of witchcraft. All those times, she was acquitted, but she had to pay court fees. She had to go down to the courthouse and she had to fight it. So this time she's like, just, what can I do? Duck me. So they did it. They took her out to the river on July 10th, 1706, and they did it. She consented to the trial by water. So what a ducking is, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the water. If you float, you're a witch because water is pure and the evilness will be pushed out. And if you float, you're a witch. If you sink, you're innocent. But if you sink, you die, because it's not like this happens relatively quickly. It takes time, people watch. And so you can't hold your breath for too long. And I don't know how many people learned to swim actually in 1706. So if you sink, you're innocent, but you're dead.
Excuse me, are you out of your mind?
So it's a lose-lose situation no matter what happens. Now there are things such called ducking stools, and those things are mostly used in England, and there are artifacts of those that still exist, and that's when they would tie a woman to a stool or a wooden bench and duck her in a river or a lake. And that was forced, and that was usually to rid her of some evil spirit, an argumentative disposition, things along that nature. You would be dunked until basically you submitted. Some women were killed that way as well. So she actually doesn't sink, she floats. Even after she's tied and all the things, and I'll talk about all the things that are tied to her, she floats. So then she's convicted, she goes to jail, and she's in jail for a couple years. She's released, she gets her property back, and she lives out the rest of her days. She's actually acquitted in 2016 by the governor of Virginia, and she gets the name, the infamous Witch of Pungo, because again, this is that area, Pungo. So we are at the Ferry Plantation House, and this is on Cheswick Lane here in Virginia Beach. And you pull over here, and then the plantation house is right behind us. But this is important to Grace Sherwood because this is where the onlookers came to see her get ducked. So if we walk over here and across the street, we can actually get to the water. So what happened? Like, what was her ducking? What did that look like? So they tied her left thumb to her right toe, they tied her right thumb to her left toe, and they rowed her out in the middle of the water and they threw her in. And she floated right away. So then they tied a 13-pound Bible, I don't know where they got that, around her neck and threw her back in again, and she floated again. So by those two accounts, she was guilty. And this is 1706. She is put into a prison, a jail, by Lynn Haven Church. So we're gonna go to that location. Now they don't know for sure how long she was in jail, but in 1714, there is records of her paying taxes on her property. So she is released by that time, so it's at least 7 years. At most 7 years, it could be less. The Lieutenant Governor of Virginia helped her get her property back, helped her get pardoned, and she lives out the rest of her life here in this area. She dies at 80 years old, and she's survived by 3 of her sons. So she actually lives through all of it. Here I am at the Ferry Plantation House, and they call this the Ferry Plantation House because this is where on the water, ferrymen with boats would stop to get fresh spring water. So there is a well over here that shows where the fresh spring water came out of, and this is where the ferryman would stop. So this is the Ferry Plantation House. And this is where the onlookers stood close to the water over here to watch Grace Sherwood get ducked. And she's thought to be buried under one of these trees here, and that's why this is considered the most haunted house in Virginia behind me. So if you see anything on this video. What kind of happens sometimes in witch trials is her body is examined by women to see if there's any abnormalities of her body. They believe that witches had different things on them, a devil's mark, things like that, and she's actually looked at for that, and they claim there's like 2 marks on her, but again, it's actually the ducking, when she survives the ducking, that she actually gets accused, and she actually goes to jail. And again, considered the most haunted house in Virginia. I'm standing where the Lynn Haven Parish Church stood in 1706. And this is where the women examined Grace Sherwood and then headed over to where the Ferry Plantation was to row her out into the water and to actually duck her. I can see the statue from here. So this is very close. So the statue is in the vicinity where the courthouse was, where the trial was. This is where they started off and actually did the ducking. And then when she was found guilty, right next to this church was where the jail was. So that seems kind of interesting. But the jail was beside the Lynn Haven Parish Church, and that's what she was incarcerated for. They don't know for how long exactly, but like I said, tax records show in 1714, she's paying taxes on her property. So she's out of jail by then. So if the trial happened in 1706 and she's found guilty, 1714 she's out. At most she's held for 7 years, and it could be much less than that. Now, I had told you that they think that there's folklore that she's buried at the Ferry Plantation. She's actually, from what her son says, so when she gets out of prison, she goes back to her property. Her property is about 40 minutes from here, and that's another reason why she was sick and tired of doing these trials, because every time she was brought to court for witchcraft, she had to find a way to get 30 miles from where her farm was to here, to go to the colonial courthouse and to pay the fines and to take time off of work and all those things. And 30 miles in 1700 is not an easy distance to travel. They believe she passes away in August or September of 1740, and they say that because her will is read in October of 1740, and her sons get her land and her inheritance, which again, she can own property because her husband passes away in 1701, property goes to her. So that field is at Pungo Ferry Road and Princess Anne Road. It's at that corner, and again, it's about 30 miles from here. That's where her sons say she's actually buried, in that field. So more than likely, that's where she really is. Some of my final thoughts about Grace Sherwood and the infamous witch of Pungo is it must have been very difficult to live in a world where you can be accused of something without really having any way to prove your innocence. It was really word of mouth and how seriously people wanted to take the accusation. You think of the Salem Witch Trials, and 19 people were killed, and that was all just based on testimony from girls who kind of let that power run rampant. So in this case, since it's not as much that kind of evidence, but more evidence of what she's actually doing in her real life, which is herbal remedies and farming, and because she's not adhering to social norms, she's wearing pants, and she has a sense of humor, which maybe back then a sense of humor wasn't a great thing. She is accused multiple times. And then she wants to submit herself to ducking because she feels it'll clear her name. But I don't understand what that would mean, because to clear her name would mean she would have to die. She would have to sink and she would have to die. So maybe she thought, if I float and just go to jail for a little while, it'll all be done. And in essence, that's really what happens. She goes to jail for a little while and it's all done. She's never accused again, and she lives out her life. She lives to be 80 years old. This is just one of those problems that a woman would have to deal with in the 1700s that women don't have to deal with so much today. You get other accusations of women today, especially women in power, but witchcraft is not one of them. It's very interesting that this is one of the last trials to happen in America, let alone in Virginia, and it's right after the hysteria of Salem, so it's pretty close, about 20 years, 10 years within the same time frame, but it's the last one to happen. So I'm happy Grace Sherwood lived out her life. I'm happy she wasn't executed as in other cases. She was pardoned 300 years later, and now she's a great story. This is all relatively in the same location, and she is remembered. She is remembered with this statue, this couple markers, and she is remembered for enduring that kind of trial. So if you're ever in Virginia, this is in Virginia Beach area, and she's a famous witch, so Salem doesn't have all the monopoly on the famous witch trials. Virginia Beach has one too. So thank you. On to my next Walk with History.